Welcome everyone, I'm the captain, Ross Memphis Pamber. With me as always is my friend and the co-host, the president, Lawrence Gervais. We're broadcasting from Calgary, Region 3 of the Métis Nation of Alberta, part of the historic Métis Nation homeland. We would also like to acknowledge these lands are the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda, with whom we share this land on the basis of our historical and ongoing relationships. We would like to thank all of our First Nation friends, Métis settlements, and to all of our Métis brothers and sisters and families. We'd like to give thanks to our elders for their guidance and to Mother Earth for the time she allows us to be here and use and share her bounty. And now, folks, from the captain and the president, let's get the wheel squeaking. Lawrence, as always, how fabulous is it? Yes, I know we should be trying to make sure we get every week hitting, but folks, time's moving for everybody. We're all trying to come back and find our schedule as we move out of the pandemic. You know, I'm looking forward to when we get to the point, Lawrence, where we don't even have to say those words. But with me, as always, my very good friend, Lawrence, the co-host, Region 3 president, and a very good friend of mine. And Ross, I'm Ross Memphis Pamber. I enjoy our conversation, Lawrence. I'm the CEO of the Memphis Group, but when it comes to what I get to do with you, we connect with our community. We have a wonderful guest who's going to be coming on a little bit later on the show, who's going to be talking quite a bit about what's happening in difficult conversations and programs that she's helping establish within Calgary and within Lower Alberta here, and it's going to continue to bring people together. But Lawrence, let's jump into a couple things that are right on the forefront of everybody's heads. The Olympics.
Yes, the Olympics, yeah.
Yeah, I love it. This is that time. I was watching fencing the other day. You know, one of those, I think it's obviously been 5 or 6 years since I turned on the channel and saw that, you know, like the shot put or, hey, look at that. Somebody's going to throw a discus. I'm just as curious. How far are they going to be able to throw that thing? It is pretty exciting time. This is what brings Canada back together.
Well, I mean, I think we're probably going to disagree on this, but I've never been pro Olympics myself, but certainly it's nice to see our athletes being represented for sure. And they work really hard to do this. And I understand that. I just don't like the business end of how they handle the Olympics. Right. So that's just my thing. Yeah.
I'll give you that all day long, right? There's always that story of, well, it's a judged sport. Oh, great. Well, here's going to be this country's judge that's never liked us. And that doesn't seem fair. And then when you do the economics,
yeah,
it's the hardest part of when they say, well, this country's going to take it on and it's going to cost them this many billions, but they will never recover that money. Yeah. And I had somebody, it was probably about 5 years ago when we were trying to bid on whatever the other Olympics that Canada was looking at or Calgary was looking at. And these people said to me, they're like, well, did you go to the Olympics in 88? Well, I don't think I attended it, but I said, yeah, I was pretty familiar with it. And they weren't even born yet, they said. Oh. Yeah. And I thought, okay. And they said, well, we've never had an Olympics anywhere near us. We just think it would be fun. Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah.
You know, there's a different experience. But yeah, when you're the taxpayer who has to pay for it later and nobody ever thought about that, you're right. So there's different perspectives that happen in when it comes to the Olympics and or any major sporting event. But when you see that these athletes, these non-pro athletes who are not going there with $20 million a year in their pocket, but they're going there. They've worked their lives for their sport. I like to enjoy some of that. I find it's to see their passion. And today the Canadian women's won gold. And the you know somebody's going to lose. I mean, we know somebody's going to win, but that's what we cheer for. And then we also realize that somebody's going to lose, and that's where you see the hard work and the emotion.
Yeah.
When you win, you achieved it. When you lose, you were so close. And you know, my heart goes out to all the Swedish team because they played so well, and it was a beautiful game and it was fun. But somebody does have to win.
Well, I mean, I understand soccer development. You know, I see it. You know, but why is the Canada team, the men's team, never make the way they're supposed to, and the women's team just go towards the finals all the time, right?
And so dominant, yeah. And struggled against the Americans, and that's funny, right? There's always that rivalry, but one of the American women's, their stronger player, Rapinoe, had said when they lost, there's only three things they should never, ever do. And one of them was lose World Cup, lose at the Olympics, and lose to Canadians.
Yeah.
And they lost for, I think it was the first time in 20 years to the Canadian team. And they, I'm sure that was hard, but so good on our team and the strength of our team and our players.
Yeah, I mean, two countries that, are well represented in hockey, we're in the soccer final, right? So kind of unique.
Yeah, there's always a strong rivalry. Lawrence, smoke in this province.
Yeah.
Now, most of it's coming from BC. Do we tax them?
Well, some of it came from Saskatchewan too, so...
So you're suggesting, okay, so Lawrence, you're suggesting we tax both.
No, I think provinces. We should build a wall, right? Build
a wall. There you go. Or one of those air fans that, when you go into a place and that keeps the heat in, those are, now we got to, maybe that's ours. Folks, I'm just telling you right now, if anybody builds an air fan on either Alberta sides in order to keep it out, just include us in this. Or do we put up more of the wind generators that sort of capture the wind but blow the smoke back this way, but then allow the energy to come to us? Maybe that's what we do.
Well, I think they're just paying us back because all the Albertans are over there, so let's send a little smoke their way, right? But.
Yeah, it's definitely a signal, definitely a smoke signal. It's not untowards the challenges of our international global pandemic. The smoke is pretty much affecting everybody.
Sure.
Folks, it's just another thing we're all trying to work through. It's not a joyous thing, but, make sure you watch the elderly, watch those people who have respiratory problems, really be conscious of the fact. And how about this? Let's not start more wildfires through human error. I read a stat the other day that it was about 47% are happen naturally occurrence-wise through lightning and the sun superheating something or peaked sometimes, but just as many of the other ones are started by blatant ignorance of people who throw cigarette butts out or don't put out campfires or have a fire when they're not supposed to have one. So folks, do your part. Just like we used to say, wear your mask. For goodness sakes, if you light a fire, make sure it's out. And don't throw your dirty cigarette butts out there to start fires.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're always started on a roadway somewhere, and it's kind of just people's pure negligence. Or sometimes it is, there is a small percentage that it is arson related to. I do have a brother who's the staff sergeant in Oliver, and they do investigations like that too. But, it's just people have poor judgment out there too.
My company this last week did a report on light in BC. And it is essentially, because of the weather and what was occurring, it was like a tinderbox. So we use satellite technology and we use machine learning and we identify what all of the foliage is around the community and what the extreme risks are when it comes to how that will react to fire. And honestly, some of the research that we found was there was a 20% high extreme likelihood that if a fire started anywhere near them between March to the end of June and July, that town could burn down.
Yeah.
Now, this is information that how do you explain to people? Well, if no fire starts, nothing's going to happen. Oh, we have a fire department. They should hopefully be able to put it out. There are just communities that when you get tinder dry, there's not enough resources to try and protect it. And you can't always tell which community it's going to be, but this is what happens. And if you just continue to be ignorant and lazy and you just don't take care of the fire or you throw the cigarette butts out, like you said, well, look at the devastating effects it has. And that was a loss of both life and property to that community.
Yeah, that's right. And, and especially during the summer when there's high winds, temperature changes and all this stuff. And it's just, you just want to be extra careful on your open pit fire or anything or the smoking and all those things.
Yeah. And global warming, much as people want to say it doesn't have an effect, just like some people want to say that they're not vaccinators, they're not whatever. Well, folks, if you look out there, it sure seems like there's more people who are sick. Sure seems like there's more wildfires, and we're seeing, a drop in the moisture indices that help protect our forests. So something is affecting. And if it's a natural occurrence, something is behind, still affecting it. So, Lawrence, I want to ask you about, the province, when Stampede was coming up, sure opened up fast. And Dina Hinshaw, who's the medical director of Alberta, has been defending or has done op-ed pieces saying, okay, this is what we've done, and here's what we're trying to do, and here's what are we reopening too fast? I mean, it doesn't seem like we're overwhelming our healthcare system. Yes, we're trying to monitor the Delta variant, but everybody seems now is just as many people who were saying before, don't lock anything down. Just as many people are saying, why did we not continue some of our protection practices?
Well, I mean, we could go all the way back to podcast number 1. I mean, if people want to rewind and watch it, you'll hear us say, yeah, I think they're basing it on the hospital numbers, the opening, right? Or these different stages. And that's exactly what they're doing. If they notice that it's not overwhelming healthcare, well, then they're going to open that door, right?
Yeah. And hey, I like the opening up. Who doesn't? Everybody likes it. But folks, let's also be responsible. If all of a sudden the next variant comes along and starts to threaten our communities, don't forget what we've learned. Mm-hmm. Let's continue to try and ensure that we stay strong as a community. And I think our Métis community, right, jumping on and being involved with the treaty and the First Nations groups who are being involved in vaccine clinics and inviting us, these things, we're going to see more of these, right? We'll see flu clinics. We'll see other clinics that are going to start happening. I'm very appreciative that, that we've been a part of these, these events.
That's right. And that mass vaccination clinic, certainly with Okaki and Siksika, it's going to be there for a while. We're looking at booster shots now. So, it's just something that will never end. But, we're not going to certainly stop our members from going there or, keep sending them their way because that door is open from them. They're like, yes, send us your members and we'll vaccinate them.
Yeah. Yeah. We have such a great relationship. And thank you again, Lawrence, for the barbecue that you put on for our community, our Métis 3. Boy, was it well attended. It was fun. There was, all sorts of little events that were happening in our new office that, that we finally started to allow, or we started to open up as a result of all the allowances. Once again, thank you. These are these little things that, even though sometimes they're last minute, there must have been 400 people there. So we know people want to gather. Thank you again for being a part of that.
And I also want to mention that we are doing the Marlene Lands Memorial Golf Tournament on August 26th at Apple Creek, just north of Airdrie. So we'll definitely be sending out a poster and all that stuff in the near future, or if you want to call the office, we'll be putting on the Region 3 Facebook page also. We're looking for about 80 golfers for that, so and sponsors, the potential ones that are watching. This is an opportunity to spend some money on an Indigenous event. We'll then bring it over to us, and we'll definitely highlight you.
Yes, that's right. So folks, make sure you listen and look into that. And all of our business community and our business community members, make sure you support this golf tournament. Marlene was such a strong matriarch for the Métis community and such a great leader. Thank you, Lawrence. Lawrence, I think it's time that we bring our guests onto the podcast. And Lawrence, I think this is our opportunity to bring our guest onto the show. With us today is Renee Price, Renee, thank you for jumping here on the Squeaky Wheel with Lawrence and I. You've probably seen a little bit about our conversation, and we talk about it a lot. And when we connect with our guests before we bring them onto our show, they usually have a little bit of familiarity. So I imagine that Lawrence and I always appreciate any conversations that happen definitely around the Indigenous community, and certainly topics that are, challenging for all of us right now that happen within our community. But before we jump too far into all of that kind of conversation, I'd like to know just a little bit about you and where, your passion came from for your relationship when it comes to the Indigenous community, but also the philanthropy roles that you take on. I mean, you're busy down there in Southern Calgary, which is part of our beautiful Region 3 here in the Métis Nation of Alberta, of Lower Alberta. So thank you for coming on our show. But Lawrence and I are going to hit you with a bunch of questions, but maybe tell us a little bit about yourself. How did that journey begin?
When I was in university, my first year of university, I was at Black Hill State in Spearfish, South Dakota. That was 1990, and Governor Mickelson declared it the year of reconciliation between the Native and the non-Native.
Hmm.
And at the time, I had a radio show on campus. And so the dean of students sent a message to me to report to his office, which scared me because thought I maybe said a bad word on the air. I thought I was probably in trouble. But he had actually sent it to many of the DJs on the station, as well as other, like some of the student government leaders, etc., and said, we want you to represent Black Hills State University at the reconciliation talk. So we went, and I grew up, my mom is an anthropologist and sociologist, so her passion was very much Indigenous culture. So she used to take me to the res for the weekend, but she really sheltered me in terms of what I saw. I mean, how you can go to Pine Ridge all through the 1970s and not interact with the American Indian movement. I don't know, but I never interacted with the American Indian movement. What I remember about going to Pine Ridge is there was this wonderful woman who made delicious choke cherry pudding and allowed me to chase her ducks. That's what I remember. So when we went to the reconciliation talks, there was no duck chasing. I mean, I was 17 by that point. And I sat for the first time in my life in a healing circle. And when you sit in a healing circle and you hear the stories about the impacts of colonization, the impacts of boarding school, the impacts of government policies and practices, and you hear it directly from the lips of people who have experienced it, unless you are a really cold, bitter person, I do not know how that cannot change you. Because that opportunity to sit in those circles changed the course of my life. I decided not to be a music major. I transferred to Capilano in Vancouver and North Vancouver, and I studied ethnic and cross-cultural relations. And every term paper I wrote was on Indigenous issues. And when I couldn't get a job after graduating, I went back to university, studied Native studies and anthropology. Again, couldn't get a job, and went back and did human resource management. And I worked in HR for 20 years. And I'll be honest and say it was not a fit for me. It just square peg, round hole. But I forced myself to do it for 20 years. And then my son was in a life-altering accident. He was burnt, and he was in the hospital for more than a month. Came very close to dying, and today is very healthy. Everything's good with him. But I had so much nervous energy when he was in the hospital that I needed to do something. So I put together a fundraiser and started the Burn Care for Kids Foundation of Canada. And through doing that process, I learned very quickly that I have natural fundraising skills, natural sales abilities. And if I'm passionate about a topic, there's very little that can stop me from achieving what I want to achieve. And so it took a while to transition from HR to fundraising, but that's what I do. And I am proud to be of service to Indigenous community across Canada, whether it be grant writing, event planning, business plan development. I help not-for-profits, First Nations communities, Indigenous entrepreneurs, Indigenous artists, and that's what makes me happy. And that's what gets me up in the morning. I love to provide that support.
That's a very heartwarming and rewarding journey that you've been on. Honestly, it's not as common, I don't think, Lawrence, where we hear a story where people have started out, from the academic side and then really connect and create that connection with a with another culture and another community. And actually, you made a really important point. And Lawrence, something I want to ask you, I guess, too, is, Rene talks about in the 90s, the idea of attending things, of a year of reconciliation. We're 31 years later. Why is it still so hard for us to even seemingly sit around or talk with government or really bring this to the forefront? Why haven't we made larger strides? And that's not necessarily a fair question to ask you in the sense that I expect you to have all the answers to that, but a long time has been moving along.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't talk about what shame means and stuff, and I appreciate your story, Renee. And my schooling was also in healing circles too, and especially in the downtown east side in Vancouver, where we planned many of them through the Aboriginal Front Door, and through my work at Red Wire magazine as a youth, and going to those Native Youth Movement meetings, and things like that. And you do learn a lot when it's all about people sharing about because it's their survival and what they talk about internally with their families, and they begin to share their story, and you go one by one and you start to understand. And that's probably a better education than they teach in schools, or they can teach anywhere. And in terms of reconciliation, what we can do as an Indigenous community is really open that door and open that channel way for the community to start listening to it. And for a long time, the government just never responded to it. And that's why it's taken 31 years. The TRC, wasn't a government initiative. This was an initiative started by certainly by the survivors themselves. And that's what the big difference is that now the truth is starting to come out. And I thank Renee for her words, and certainly being in those communities where where that impacts of colonization have hit tremendously. And I was in those neighborhoods too, but it's just who I am. I'm a little bit different in terms of how I look at things in terms of reconciliation.
I remember being in school, and it was one of those things where you'd learn about colonialism, and it was sort of, how did colonialism affect the other parts of the world? It wasn't, how did colonialism affect Canadians or the traditional, land use of our First Nations friends, and or, as the relationships happen, and all of a sudden you have this, the Métis community and Métis citizens that come out of that. We didn't understand. It's like that wasn't the focus. It was, education was, what's the success that has happened around this? So that's really important. And it's really nice to hear, people like yourself, Renee, in these kind of roles who are building those connections. And let's talk a little bit about some of those connections, because I know we're going to talk a little bit about the SOAR program. And I'm really excited when we get to the idea of your Sports Unite People, of one of your other programs. But, you live in south part of Calgary in Lake Bonavista. And let's talk a little bit about how the SOAR program and that relationship came together, because this is important to, for your community. But when it starts in your community, hopefully it goes to all the Calgary communities.
Absolutely. So first off, I want to acknowledge it would be really, really inappropriate for a white lady and a bunch of other white ladies to go out and plan a powwow in their own community. Like, that would be appropriation, and we're not doing that. So what I want to be clear, we have a lot of Indigenous leadership in this process. This whole thing started in 2019. One of my clients in Saskatchewan called me in the middle of the night, and he said, Renee, my nephew is in Calgary and he's having car problems. He's traveling to BC for a powwow, and I can't send him money until tomorrow. Can you help him out? Yep. And then 3 minutes later, another phone call, and the guy said, this is Dylan, and Uncle Lee said for me to phone you. And I said, yeah, I'm going to send you my address. He says, no, I'm on your patio. I said, oh, okay, well, come in. And he came in and found the guest room and went to bed. And the next morning, he got up and we made pancakes, and we were standing over my sink cleaning strawberries together. And my next door neighbor walked out onto her patio, She looked directly into my kitchen window. She made eye contact with him. She made eye contact with me. She knew that he was in my home as my guest. There's no question. He was, after breakfast, he went out into the green space in front of our home. And he started, he called his girlfriend, checked in with her. He started phoning around looking for his car parts. And she phoned the police because there was a brown man with braids on our green. And the police came. They came twice in 16 hours because she phoned twice in 16 hours. And I was horrified. I was embarrassed. I was hurt. I was, I couldn't apologize to him enough. Like, that's so not okay. His response was, Auntie, it's a Tuesday. That's what a brown man experiences. And that's not okay. That's not okay. So I immediately, I did a year contract with the Tsuut'ina Nation. And so they literally, the Tsuut'ina Nation is literally 5 minutes from my home in my car. I can walk there if I really want to. So I called one of the elders and I was just furious, like so much emotion. And she said, okay, it's okay. This is what we talked about. This is your chance. You are now have to step up. You have to educate people in your neighborhood. Okay, I've been training for this since I was in university. We can do this. I said, how are we going to do it? And she said, well, we'll just host a round dance on the green space in front of your house. Okay. So I called the city and I asked, like, okay, how do I get a permit? We want to close down the green. We want to have a round dance. And the city said, okay, well, here's the link. Go print out this form, go to all your neighbors, have them sign that they support you closing down the street, having a round dance, and we're good to go. Every neighbor. Okay. I went from door to door to door to door to door. There's 32 houses total on it. Everybody signed until I hit the one house.
The one house.
And everybody was incredibly supportive and incredibly excited until I hit the one house. At which point I was told that they would not sign because they did not want Indigenous people to feel welcome coming in to our green and using our green because they paid good taxes for this neighborhood to be safe. And they told me that I should move my home-based business outside of a residential area because I was putting their children at risk for being kidnapped or hurt. I cannot even begin to express to you the level of anger and I felt, and probably the level of irrational anger, like especially after the elder had already told me it was my job to educate. I just felt angry. And I said a few choice words that we can't air. And went back to the house and called the elder and I said, I'm going to submit this application with everybody's signature but hers, and I'm just going to hope that the city accepts it. And the elder said, no. I didn't realize how angry you are. You cannot host a round dance when you are angry. You cannot educate other people when you are angry. We will talk about this again next year. Next year came, we talked about it, it was here. We couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. And so as 2021 rolled around, I started asking, can we do it? And she said yes. And then the remains of all those babies were found. Mm-hmm. And it seemed even more important to do. And not just for my street, but for all of Lake Bonavista and ultimately all of Treaty 7 and Calgary. So we have this event will be 100% open to the public, completely free of charge, and we invite everyone to attend.
Now that event, I think, is down for the 27th to the 29th, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and that information, I had looked it up, and I apologize. It's available.
It's on the Lake Bonavista chat page. There's also an event page on Facebook called SOAR, SOAR, Speak Out Against Racism. And we're going to have everything. We have so many things. We've got TP teachings. We've got oral tradition. We've got Cindy Rivers, transgendered comedian. We've got a mini powwow. We've got kickball and dodgeball, because the idea is that we want to do things together that are going to build relationship. We're going to have an Indigenous market. So anybody who is Indigenous and in Treaty 7 is welcome. If you have a business, whether it's an equine therapy company, whether you're an artist, if you want to promote your plumbing company, come set up a table. Tell Lake Bonavista that you're open for business. Sell your artwork. If you've got a licensed food truck and you're Indigenous, set it up. Sell us Indian tacos. Sell us whatever's on your menu. But it's free for any Indigenous person to participate in that Indigenous marketplace.
Oh, that's absolutely fabulous. And yeah, speak out against racism. So folks, make sure you get onto the Lake Bonavista site. Make sure you look up this information. August 27th to the 29th. And that's, it's a lot of planning to do anything. So thank you from, just all us as community members, as citizens of Calgary, of Alberta, of Canada, that you and your team are putting this together and sharing your story with us. Because again, a lot of times people find out, oh, there's an event going on. They don't always understand the history behind it, the where the passion came from in order to be a part of wanting to make change. And that is something that you're doing, and recognizing that change has to occur.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that sounds fabulous. And that's why, we wanted to make sure we met with you early so that we could try and get our community to become aware. Everybody, get out there to participate. But now you also have the Sports Unite Against People. And this sounds like it's also based a little bit on the racism, and how do we include people in as we gather. And this is what sports are we referring to? How are you, the relationships, how are you building this one? And how do you find the time to do it all?
So Sports Unites People, SUP. SUP is what we call it. So you will hear, hopefully over the next year, that's going to be a common term that you hear coming from professional athletes. SUP, that's what we want. So the Sports Unites People, or SUP, was founded by Brent Dodginghorse. Brent is a counselor for the Satana Nation. He is also an alumni hitman, and he's a world champion bull wrestler, steer wrestler.
Steer wrestler,
yeah. I'm not a cowboy type.
No problem.
So steer wrestler, and he really went into a place of introspection when George Floyd was killed, and he came to me, he said, okay, we're going to do something. I said, okay, what are we going to do? And he said, we're going to start a not-for-profit. I said, okay, for what? We're going to educate young athletes about racism and discrimination and how their behaviors impact their teams, the success of their teams, and their communities. Wow, okay, yeah, let's do that. So we have formed a board. We started, with what Brent calls diversity summits, where we invited people from all sorts of communities to come together and help us form the basis of this. So we had Middle Eastern people, Hispanic people, LGBTQ plus. We had disabled people, the white girl, other Indigenous people. Everybody from every faith and every ethnicity present to engage and get feedback from. We designed a program focused on diversity, inclusion, respect, and equality. And the way that we are framing that is we have what we're calling a core training program around those core values. And that also comes with a portion on discrimination and racism, followed by the opportunity for teams to create their commitment, their code of conduct around diversity and inclusion. So we explore language. We explore, why don't you use the N word? Where is that word rooted? What is the history of that word? What does it actually mean? We get people to think about, if you're using LGBTQ plus slurs in the locker room, and you have somebody on your team who hasn't come out of the closet, it creates a lack of trust between you and that team member, which impacts the performance of your team. Mm-hmm. So we try to get kids thinking critically about the language they're using to describe one another, to describe themselves, to describe their communities, and to shift their behavior to ensure that their language and the way they're engaging with one another is inclusive, is respectful, and does, in fact, model diversity, equality, respect, and inclusion. And then on top of our core diversity training, we are forming committees for each of those communities that LGBTQ plus, Indigenous, Black, Asian, Middle Eastern, Indian, everybody's getting a module. Those modules are created by and delivered by communities they represent. And those are sort of our advanced, kind of beyond our core. The whole idea is the more we know, the more we're exposed to diversity, the more we understand the issues facing different communities, the better we are as people, the better we are together. And we believe that, it's not just going to shift the culture of sport. The training that we're going to deliver is going to follow these kids into their communities, into their classrooms, into their homes, and as they get older, into the workplace. And it will change Canada. That's our goal.
Yeah, it'll change the people's misconceptions, misperceptions. The idea that you're working to create tools. And somebody had said to me a little while ago, and it was a great quote that I've stolen from them, or I try to use, but it was not about us without us. In other words, don't just start like the province. Don't try to start educating people about a culture that you don't know anything about. Bring that culture into the conversation. Allow them to educate. Capture the information so you can help share it and become part of sharing the information with, sort of their blessing as a result of the fact that they were included in the conversation. So I think that sounds fabulous. Everybody's going to have an opinion about, well, why didn't we start here? Well, why didn't you start there? Yeah, why didn't you start it? But you've chosen a place to start. And SUP, starting with sports and uniting people through sport, that sounds like a fabulous one. And in fact, I think all of Canada today was united based on the fact that Lawrence and I were talking a little bit earlier about the fact that the Canadian women won gold. And I watched that game and, I was beside myself watching in fear that they were going to lose. And, it was, when you watch it, the journey of their success doesn't overshadow the devastating loss for the Swedish team. Mm-hmm. But that is sport. And that also united them. And there was every type of, ethnicity participating. That's one of the great things about the Olympics. So I think that's a fabulous message. Lawrence?
Well, I mean, I also want to comment on certainly both events. We are Métis folks. This is our Métis podcast, and I also want to make sure that they're aware that if there are Métis events or Métis culture being presented, that we trying to promote our members to be a part of it. We certainly aren't powwow based or certainly Treaty 7 individuals, but we certainly support one another and support other Indigenous events. And maybe if there's an opportunity one day to have more Métis culture being presented at Bonavista, we're definitely open to that. And then in terms,
actually, there is.
Okay,
there is.
Yeah, it just was never mentioned. So yeah.
Because we're not quite there yet, but the community association already came to me, and they said, February, if we give you the big gym for a full day, can you do something with it? And I said, yeah. They said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. Maybe we pick another culture. Maybe we go with Métis. Maybe we go with Sikh. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll do something. But Lawrence, if you want to work with me and give me leadership, I need Indigenous leadership to do it. I need Métis leadership to do it. I'm your girl. I'll get it done for you.
Yeah, if we can open that door, certainly. We're not certainly slow on events because we've tried to do as much during COVID, but we are looking for more opportunities. We do about 15 a year here in the region. But certainly there's no shortage of people that can jig or play the fiddle or musicians and all those things. So, if we have the door open for us to do it, then yeah, we'll definitely be a part of it. And I don't mind sharing all that and working with Sutina on certain aspects. And, I like the idea of the sports things too, because, we never, as I would say Métis Nation, we certainly celebrate our Métis athletes, but not to certainly the full extent. And as you may know, the Métis people who we have here and across the homeland sometimes don't identify, right away, and certainly keep themselves a little hidden. But once we find out that there's an NHLer or there's somebody who won the Stanley Cup who's Métis, well, then we kind of, throw their names forward, right? So, well, we definitely have enough here that I know in Southern Alberta that could support a sports council or any sports programs, even right now.
Oh, that's amazing. That would be awesome.
Well, thank you, Renee, for all of the information that you shared with us. Thank you for sharing that personal story and the journey that you've taken, as well as that relationships you've had in your family, and when it comes to how you shared conversation, and then your journey through the academics to find the roles that you're in. But you're definitely, based on the people who are connecting us, you're an inspiration. You're a community leader when it comes to facilitating and making change. And again, we don't always have to be a part of a culture to celebrate it. And I think that's why it's important. You're creating opportunities for people to go out and learn more. And once you learn more, you find the walls start to come down a little bit. So thank you very kindly for jumping on the squeaky wheel here with us. Lawrence and I always appreciate your time in these kind of conversations.
Thank you for having me. I'm learning Tsuut'ina, so I should have even started with a greeting in Tsuut'ina, but I'll end with just saying Siasgas. I really appreciate being here.
Tansi, thank you very kindly. Lawrence, there are some fabulous people who have stepped up on the whole personal side of their life's journey to, whether it's that they're trying to educate themselves, whether it's their family, whether in the case of Renee, educate the community and the challenges that, she's sort of faced. We're very blessed. I say it all the time with the people that we get to communicate with and bring on our TV shows or our podcasts and conversations. But here's somebody who's really, contributing. And I'm so happy that we have, our avenue in order to share this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, she has a base. She understands what reconciliation is. And like she said, she's non-Aboriginal and she's leading the charge. And certainly that's important for us as Indigenous people to have allies or very strong allies in the community to kind of help bridge the sort of gap a bit in terms of, what reconciliation means. Well, then, Renee can be the model for that, certainly for companies to understand, and it's nice to see that she has an HR background, because for me, that's always the constant criticism I have sometimes in companies, industry, and with schools and institutions, is that, when there's an Indigenous person sitting in a role, is that person connected to the community? Does that person understand what reconciliation is? Were they raised in Aboriginal? And these are questions that we ask as leaders when we sit in those rooms, and sometimes it could be pretty awkward for us to do that. But if there's HR in all these departments that would cross those T's and those I's for us, then we wouldn't have to ask those questions, right? So,
yeah.
But I mean, and it's not something that we're, racist towards an Indigenous person who doesn't have the knowledge. It's just, when we talk about action in those meetings, we want to make sure that action is being taken care of when that meeting closes, right? And we know we can trust that Indigenous person in those roles. But certainly, the only question an HR person has to ask in an interview is just say, how do you connect to your community? That's it.
Yeah.
Right? And get them to, answer you. And that's how you make your decision on these Indigenous roles. Otherwise, put them in a different one and everything's fine. But yeah.
Yeah. I like that, often people ask, well, how do I connect, or what should I do? Well, here's a great one. Something like connecting through sports, but let's educate.
Yeah.
Let's stamp out racism. There's a different term for it all the time, but at the end of the day, it's still intolerance of somebody else. It's racism based on the same, usually comes from a point of ignorance. And, if we can create more tools, if we can give HR people more tools that they learn and now go, here's what my group needs to understand.
Yeah. And for me, for the Métis community, for instance, because, our identity is on this, ocean wave thing, and it comes and it goes, and for people, right? But I think for us is, understanding what racism has done to the previous generation before, us. And we're kind of dealing with those impacts still as a Métis community. Maybe not so much with First Nations, but because they have their own type of racism, and we have some very dark Métis that certainly will get it. They'll get it on either end, and sometimes they just say, well, I'm a different community, or I'm not Métis, and I'm not a Native person. Leave me alone, type thing, right? Or give me access. But sometimes it's just people's perception, of First Nations and Métis, and they just unleash it. They'll it's still happening to this day, but I'm sure it happened way worse to the community above us, those age groups that are above us.
Yeah.
They probably felt it a lot further.
And, at the time told, don't tell anybody, don't say anything. Well, then it's a different type of, you don't get to gather, or you don't get to try and connect. So hopefully we're starting to break down some of those barriers.
But there's also, what's funny, Ross, is, and it's not funny, but there's a certain percentage of Métis people that have racism in their bones too. Right. Yep. And that's something that we sometimes notice every once in a while. It's not all the time, but we do see it. And maybe that's just because it's so ingrained in them, sort of generations of not acknowledging their Indigenous blood, that they just said, we'll just be racist ourselves. So there is a thing like that too. And we try to combat it with them as much as possible and say, hey, things have changed. It's okay to identify. You're not going to lose a job. You're not going to, lose, not going to go in a restaurant and they're going to close it down once you get in there. It doesn't happen that way anymore.
Yeah. It's important that we identify those people even within our own community. Listen, if don't you understand that your intolerance of other people is then also, we're probably reflected in somebody else's intolerance. We all need to work together. And when we identify that to people, it's not about, it should be their shame, but we're the ones who often, when you point it out to them, you feel kind of bad. Well, it's not about you feeling bad about their ignorance. We're helping them hopefully recognize their ignorance, and it's their shame that, listen, you need to do better. But Lawrence, yeah, I think we talked about a lot here today. We hit the Olympics, we talked about Dina, we were talking about the opening up. Yeah, all sorts of stuff that's happening in our province. But big shout out to all of our athletes who have stepped up, and the challenges that they faced when it came to being athletes, the challenges of where we are in cancel culture and confusion about relationships and racism and all this. But at the end of the day, they're still helping unite our country. And again, when I was cheering for our athletes this last couple weeks here during the Olympics, absolutely fabulous. I'm enjoying it so much. So Lawrence, thank you again, as always, for our time that we get together. This is our chance to gather and share the connection that we've learned about in our community. Close us out.
Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Sorry we're not as regular as we have been through the summer, but prior to the summer. But I think now we're going to be weekly, and we'll hit the subscribe button. We're trying to get on iTunes, Spotify. We're on Tell Us On Demand, which I'm sure we're moving ahead with a lot more of those. So, we're pretty excited on what Squeaky Wheels pattern has kind of changed us, and more opportunities here in the near future.
Somehow they must like us, Lawrence.
Yeah.
So folks, TSW at Métis3.org. You can look up some more information, Métis.org, Métis3.org. And if you have any questions, make sure you reach out to us. We appreciate your time.